Each of us as individuals contain a variety of characteristics that comprise our identity as human beings. We may be described as smart or funny or passionate or driven. And when we look at Scripture, we see that God has several characteristics or attributes that help us to understand His nature and identity as God. Over the next few videos, we're going to take a look at a few of these key attributes of God. The first three are what I would refer to as the three omnis. The first is that God is omnipotent. A basic definition of this term is that God is all-powerful. God is able to do anything according to His perfect will. And this attribute is highlighted throughout Scripture. God is often referred to as the Almighty. And Jeremiah 32 notes that nothing is too difficult for God. Jesus would say in Matthew 19 that with God all things are possible. God's omnipotence means that God's power is infinite. Therefore, there are some things that He could do, but He chooses not to do. This characteristic doesn't mean that God can do anything. We see in Scripture that there are things that God cannot do. That is why omnipotence is defined as God being able to do anything according to His will. For example, God cannot lie, He cannot deny Himself or cease to exist. God cannot do anything that does not line up with all of His other attributes. A term that's closely linked to God's omnipotence is the idea of His sovereignty. This refers to the idea that God is completely in control over everything. Now, the second omni is the attribute that God is omnipresent. Simply put, this attribute means that God is everywhere at once. God is not limited to a particular location. He is able to be at every point in space with His whole being. We see this attribute in passages such as Jeremiah 23, in which God notes that He fills all of heaven and earth. In Psalm 139, David notes that there's nowhere he can go to escape the presence of God. It is important to distinguish the idea of omnipresence of God from a pantheist theology that says that God is in everything and everything is God. The biblical idea is that God is present everywhere, but is distinct from creation. Now, what can really stretch your mind is to understand that this idea is not saying that God is simply this infinitely big deity surrounding all of creation and space. We know that God existed before creation and before space even. God was not in a location before creation. He just simply was. Now, the final of the three omnis is that God is omniscient. Again, the simple definition of this term is that God is all-knowing. God completely knows Himself and all things that are actual and possible. Because God is infinite, He can fully know everything about His unlimited self. Paul alludes to this concept in 1 Corinthians 2 when he notes that only God can know the complete thoughts of God. Omniscience also implies that God knows all things that exist and all things that actually happen. God knows everything about everything. He is the smartest being. He knows the numbers of hairs on our head. He knows everything about every topic of knowledge. God is the smartest in math and science and literature and history. But God also knows everything that is possible. God not only knows what will or does happen, He even knows what could happen. And so to say that God is all-knowing is to also say that God's knowledge is complete. God never learns anything because He already knows it all. So, in all of these three attributes, we are introduced to an incredible God. This God creates in us a deep sense of awe and wonder. And for David in Psalm 139, the understanding of God as an all-knowing, all-powerful, and everywhere was a terrifying thought at first. First, he wants to try and escape this type of God. But then it becomes a source of comfort to know that God is always with him, powerful to protect and provide for him, and knowledgeable of Him to be able to love and value Him completely.